through fil awalim, through different universes, through different, even you can say, um, you know, different phases of existence. And that's what we've been concentrating on. So to sum up what he mentioned and what I've been mentioning before, is that he says that there's three things that comprise a human being, haqiqat al-insan. However, one of them, of course, is only in this world, but it will be there in the next world, but different. That is, first, a jism al-kathif, that is the physical body that we live in, has density, so forth and so on. Then the other is a jism al-latif, that is the more subtle, meaning not perceivable by the naked eye, but yet it is still a jism. It is something, a jism literally in Arabic also means something that's comprised of parts. So if you look at it from that perspective also, the nafs can be considered uh, metaphysical, but just like the physical jism, excuse me, is comprised of parts, that also is comprised of parts, meaning the nafs in totality, the human soul would comprise of different aspects, just like the body is comprised of different aspects. As an example, as Al-Imam al-Ghazali kind of iterate or elucidated in his Ihya Ulumuddin, that the nafs would be comprised of things like this: the ruh, that aspect of our spiritual being; the qalb, the heart; the aql, the intellect; and so forth and so on. And Allah knows best. But in essence, still, he's saying here that it is a body, but very subtle, imperceptible, like other bodies, like the malaika and the jinn will also be considered ajsam, physical bodies, but imperceptible. And of course, we know now that there are physical things like cells and atoms and even these germs and viruses and good bacteria as well. All of that, these are bodies, but they're not perceptible to the naked eye. And if they become even more latif and more subtle as we go on, meaning that the malaika normally will never become perceptible to the naked eye here in this dunya. However, that did happen, and it does happen from time to time. But it's important to understand that when you see the malaika in this world, if that happens to someone, it is never in their true form. فَتَمَّثَلَ لَهَا بَشَرًا سَوِيًّا. So when the Quran explains that when Jibreel alayhi salam appeared in front of Maryam radiallahu ta'ala anha, he took the form, the method of a very handsome and almost perfectly proportioned man. So they take forms and you see that form, but that is not their real form. So their actual real form still becomes imperceptible to us and not able to see that in this dunya illa ma sha Allah. The Prophet ﷺ, at one incident, as we know, he was able to see Jibreel alayhi salam in his real form, but that was too much for him and he passed out. He was not able, because this dunya is very limited. Um, you're only able to see so far, and you can only perceive so much, even with the tools that we have available now on the modern age, or now the postmodern age. You're still only able to see so far and still only able to see so much. So the dunya is not a place, it is not the maqam, if you will, for us to have those kind of revelations, to be able to see things that are not part of it and beyond it, to the extent that they can truly be seen. That's why also the sight of Allah, the ru'ya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, although there's some arguments about whether that can happen in the dream state or not, but of course all ulama will agree that in this dunya that's not going to happen. Okay, but it will happen in the akhirah, because that is the place where it is possible. It is the place, as everything we know, that rules even that we can perceive, of even rules of physics, change according to the maldi, according to the place where these things are happening, or in the place that you go. So what would occur here on Earth is not going to happen when you're in space, as an example. So all that should be very, it should be something that our minds can accept and understand and verify to be very logical. But of course, these are things that we don't necessarily experience. And the only reason we don't experience them is because we are in the dunya, not because they're not there. But however, going on with the subject, what does that mean is that they still call them ajsam, meaning the malaika, the jinn, certain things we don't perceive with the naked eye. They are there, they have realities, but they do have ajsam. They have some form of a body, although that body may be so subtle in its origin and in its matter that it cannot be perceived. And there's plenty of things that are from the material world that are so subtle that they cannot be perceived. So that should be accepted. Going on, they say also, he said, and the third aspect, so the physical body, a jism kathif, the subtle but physical, yet physical but subtle, a jism latif, which we sometimes refer to the nafs, and then the ruh, which some say jawharun mujarrad, just to recap, a completely metaphysical reality. And those three things, roughly in general, will compromise the human being. Now, death in this world occurs when the ruh, they say, is the rabita. It is that thing, that human soul, if we translate that as a soul as well, the ruh is that thing which connects this subtle body, the nafs, right? And as some call it, nafs, nafs al-darraka, that entity of humans that actually is able to perceive things. Because the body is almost like the vehicle. And as I mentioned before, mind over matter, there are times when a person can injure themselves and not feel it because you're not cognizant, you don't know about it, you're not paying attention to it. So it's actually the body, is only even the nervous system and everything else that's going on. Is the mind has to be able to first be aware of it in order for us to feel it. So it shows us that the idrak and the comprehension of these things is actually not from the body, but it is from something else. And what we call even then the mind, we say the intellect again, is not a physical thing, it cannot be quantified. So taking that on into consideration, what we're saying is that that when death occurs, it is a separation of the nafs and the ruh ma'an, that these two things are taken from the human being, and that's what causes death in this world. We've talked about a lot of that, so I wanted to go on further and to recap that. The ayah that I've quoted often and to prove some of these points, Allah yatawaffal anfus fi manamiha wa hina mawtiha, that Allah is the one who takes to him the souls, anfus, the plural of nafs, when you're in a sleeping state, when they're sleeping, and also at the time of their death. Now, the question here is when you're sleeping, we know that you're not dead. We don't call you clinically, you're not dead, because the body is still reacting. You're still breathing. Your heart's still beating. All the functions of your organs are still there. So that's not called death. If the nafs is not there, Allah says He has taken that nafs. So what does that mean? It means there has to be still something there in order for death not to occur. So they say that what it is again dividing, that there is a human soul that is the connection between the nafs and the body. When it is there, life is there. When it is not there, when both of those are removed, then it's what we call death. So then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that Allah has determined that he or she will die, then hold that nafs back. And the one and the one whom Allah has not yet written death for, then that soul will be let go to a determined time, meaning when the time of the death will occur. So death occurs in essence, based on this ayah and other types of evidences, that when the ruh and the nafs together are removed from the body. Now the body is what actually goes. After that though, the perception and the ability to perceive, which was not really the body's anyhow, it continues. And this is what we call life in the barzakh, the intermediary stage between here and the akhirah. And this is where we have many hadith, and some of which we will mention today, that tell us about the experiences of people at the time of death, even before all these other stages occur. And we'll probably mention hadith that are more hopeful in nature because of the situation we're in now. Many people might become, and rightfully so, a little perturbed about the possibilities, especially when people think about dying alone. But the reality is nobody actually dies alone. And especially for believers, there is special mercy that Allah has upon them, that they're never going to be alone truly at that time, that they're always, that their perception stays, they will know what's going on, but their experience will be pleasant. And also, I wanted to mention certain things about the dream state because it's related, and that is, it shows us that the comprehension and idrak remains in a person, and that idrak is so powerful that even though the body is not experiencing the things that your soul is experiencing, the nafs is experiencing, yet the body reacts to it. So people can have experiences in dream states that will give them all the sensual reactions that normally they would assume happens to the body, which is another point, that the body is not really the one that experiences these things. It is the soul. The body is just the vehicle. So anyhow, going on with that, I wanted to mention some interesting things that are relative to us too. Is that there's a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, which the Prophet ﷺ, an authority of Abu Hurairah anhu, the Prophet ﷺ said, إذا اقترب الزمان لم تكن رؤيا المؤمن تكذبه. That in the end of times, it will be very rare that the dream of a believer would be false. It would be very rare that the dreams of the believers will experience in those times will ever be false. And then the Prophet ﷺ said that رؤيا المؤمن جزء من 46 جزءا من النبوة. That the dream of a believer is in actuality a part of 46 parts of nubuwah, of prophethood. وَمَا كَانَ مِن نُبُوَّةٍ إِنَّهُ لَا يَكْذِبُ. And whatever comes from nubuwah can never be false. Okay, so it needs some explanation because that's a profound hadith. Part of the hadith, namely that the dream of a believer is a portion from amongst the 46 portions of nubuwah, of prophethood. That aspect of the hadith has been related by more than 10 other companions, which means that it elevates it to the status. The fact that it's in Sahih Muslim, it's considered to be Sahih, it's sound in itself. But that portion of the hadith that mentioned as being a fraction or a part of the 46 fractions or parts of nubuwah, that particular part of the hadith has been mentioned by more than 10 Sahaba, which means that it's actually not just Sahih. That particular part of the hadith means that the idea that the believer's dream, a true dream of a believer, is a portion of nubuwah, is mutawatir. And again, just based on the idea of historical veracity and narration, that means it is equivalent to the Quran in its veracity and its truthfulness from a historical point of view. And that should be something that strikes our interest. So the true dream of a believer would be a portion of nubuwah. First of all, what does that mean? Because obviously there's no prophet after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the fact that even he said that it's mutawatir, so this is a reality. He taught us that there must be some importance here, and there must be something that we should be paying attention to, and it's also something we should believe in. If it's mutawatir, we have to accept it as fact, just as we accept the Quran as fact, and that it is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even just based on historical veracity. So there's some explanation is needed there, and it is very profound too. Now, obviously, nubuwah itself, the word, can come from two sources, as some of the ulama explain, either naba, anin naba al-azim, like the Surah al-Naba, which means khabar or information. That's something that is relayed to you, news that is given to you. Again, meaning that it doesn't come from the other sources of human knowledge on our epistemology. You haven't thought about it logically and then there derived a conclusion. You haven't necessarily experienced it with your senses, so and then there derived a conclusion, but you were told about it. So that's the important idea. You were something that you were informed of. So what would that mean then? Then a true dream is like a portion of nubuwah. It would mean that, and that's why the Prophet afterwards said that وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ النُّبُوَّةِ, whatever happens to come from nubuwah, إِنَّهُ لَا يَكْذِبُ, there will never be false. It alludes to the fact that a true dream is like receiving information directly from Allah Azza wa Jalla. A true dream is like receiving information directly from Allah Azza wa Jalla. How is that significant to the first portion of the hadith? إِذَا اقْتَرَبَ الزَّمَانُ. When there's a different, the literal translation of it is when time becomes close. And some ulama have given explanations. The vast majority of them seem to agree that it refers to the end of times or the last days. So their explanation, therefore, is that in those times, because the lack of ulama, the lack of enlightened souls, and the types of tumultuous fitna that people experience, and the believers will want answers, but they won't be able to find them. They will find themselves perplexed and confused by the situations that they're in, and they won't really get straight answers all the time. So as a mercy from Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them these true dreams so that they will find answers through them, as if a communique, if you will, from Allah Azza wa Jal, to kind of give them the answers that they need, or the tasalli and the comfort that they need as a mercy from Allah. Just like as they say, the Ahl Fatra, the people in between, the people who were in between prophets, who may not have had guidance, especially in between Isa alayhi salam and to Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, because by that time the Ahl Kitab, the people of the book, had already changed their religions and their scriptures to the point that there was really no truth left to be had there. That people were guided by Allah, like Salman al-Farisi as an example, if you read his biography, that Allah guided them out of His mercy to find the truth and seek the truth, even in such an environment where the truth really was very, very far and few between. So it's the same type of thing that they're saying here. That in those tumultuous times and trying times where people will be confused and won't really have answers all the time, Allah's mercy on them is that He will give them these types of ru'ya, or these dreams. That ru'ya means that in the sleeping state, a person's soul experiences, the nafs experiences these things, and that nafs will experience it in a way that it will literally be, as it will, a communique or a message from the Creator Allah Himself. Then after that, in the same hadith, it is explained that dreams now must be understood in three parts. You have either a true vision or dream, which is from Allah, or it's hadith al-nafs, which kind of is similar to what some psychologists say, that it's just really your, if you will, subconscious speaking to you, or your own worries of the day. If throughout the day you have certain worries and concerns that you still went to sleep with, so you're just speaking to yourself, is literally what hadith al-nafs means. It's just something that's self-imposed, or it is from the shaitan, or it is from the devil, which of course is something that we don't pay any attention to. And the Prophet also gave us guidelines about what to do in cases like that. But to sum that up, what does it mean though? But there are still some dreams which are true. And those true dreams are important enough that the information that we have received from the Prophet ﷺ, that they are a portion of Nubuwah, meaning they are literally messages from God, that is mutawatir. It is something we have to accept as fact. And also that these things occur more commonly amongst the people of the last days, because of their really being, not having to them the information that they need and the guidance that they need to take them through the times that they live in. So as a mercy from Allah, He will give them such dreams. This to me was intriguing, and I thought that this is also something hopeful for all of us, because a lot of times maybe we don't know the answers. Even with nowadays, we still have scholars, alhamdulillah, and we're still communicating. We're trying our best to encourage one another and give advice to what to do in certain times like this and other times that we've experienced, and who knows what will happen in the future. However, we don't know how long that will last. If we're still around and that's there, mashallah, that's a blessing from Allah. If not, then what do we do? Well, the answer is like everything else. You are never alone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as long as you're sincere and your heart is open, will always guide the person to the truth. This is the really essence of everything. People often get confused about things, but there should be no confusion. If you want guidance, Allah will give it to you. If you want help, the only yastajib lakum, call me, I will answer. You will get it. And that's why Allah knows best those amongst mankind who truly want guidance. You have to remember that those who reject guidance, it is their choice. Okay? It is their choice. They never wanted it to begin with. But you and I, we should always have that hope that if we take a step back and we ask Allah for guidance, and we ask Allah for truth, and we are sincere in it, then we will never be bereft of it. We will never be bereft of it. Allah will always, we have these things that Allah has given us. The human soul is, the 46 parts of Nubuwah, that is a very, I would have to probably prepare for that, because that's 46 subjects, first of all. And I haven't seen much explanation as to what exactly that is. Another aspect of it being related to the 46 parts of Nubuwah is related separately to our epistemology. That's why I mention that often, that we say that mankind learns through three channels, either through their sense perception, the ahwas, either through the aql and the intellect, or through khabar, meaning getting information from a second party. Now, if you look at it from that also, the idea is that it is a part of Nubuwah, is that where sense perception doesn't necessarily give you concrete, absolute answers, and the intellect also cannot give you concrete, answers. Thereafter, the only resort is that a person is told. And in Nubuwa, that information coming from a second party means that the information is coming from Allah direct, as opposed from another human being. For us, it came through human beings. Hence the concept of isnad and having, that every narration that we have should be verified by looking at who said it. That is very important to us in Islamic epistemology and in our ulum and in our sciences, that information for us, it comes from other human beings. In other words, we're not speaking to Jibreel alayhi salam, and God is not directly communicating with us. So we need to get our information from people, so their veracity has to be verified. Okay, but there is an aspect as this hadith.
This is safe. I'm not being heard.
This hadith is actually implying that even a regular believer can communicate with God too through a true dream. So that would imply also that human beings can at times also get, if you will, messages from God or epiphanies. But in order to talk about that, you have to make it very clear that as a rule, generally all the ulama agree that ilham, what is called divine inspiration, that does come to non-prophets, is not considered a valid source of information. And what they mean by that is it doesn't have to be accepted by others. It doesn't have to be accepted by others. If you know something through empirical knowledge, that something has been tested long enough, and this is through our senses, that it becomes to us a fact, then you can verify it and you can tell others about it, and they will experience the same thing, and they have to accept it. Same thing goes through the intellect, that there's certain general principles you verify through practice, and then you show other people 2 + 2 = 4, everyone accepts it. And there are certain akhbar and information that we receive from other people that we verify that information and we accept it as fact, so forth and so on. And there's methodologies in each category. What about ilham? What about this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that dream is actually that? It is a portion of nubuwwah, meaning communicate between Allah and His servant. Well, then, how do we verify it? How do we know? And when and where does it become other people have to accept it as fact too? Well, we say, generally speaking, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. What do I say about people seeing the Prophet? It's absolutely true. That's also a hadith that's mutawatir. Man ra'ani fil manami faqad ra'ani. Whoever has seen me in a dream has indeed seen me. I mean, it's the emphasis too is not just that it's not because in the shaitan cannot take the form of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this hadith again is mutawatir. It's not just sahih. It is established on tawatur. It's a fact. So people can now, whether the person has actually seen him or not, that can be disputed. But if a person does see the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a dream, it is him, and that does happen, and that is a fact based on this hadith alone. So again, we're not just basing this on our imagination; we're basing this on sound reports that are historically established. This is what we have to understand by the science of hadith. When we say something sahih, hasan, da'if, it's acceptable, it's strong, it's acceptable, or it's weak, or it's mutawatir. That's so many narrations that prove that it is, the point being, an historical fact. They're looking at it from that point of view, that is this something that the Prophet ﷺ actually said historically, factually. So this is one of the things he did say, that if you see the Prophet, you have seen him. The idea is, though, based on all this, that can happen. God can speak to a person through a dream. God's messenger ﷺ can be seen in a dream. But the thing is that why don't we then make that a fact for other people, is that because we're not always able to understand, first of all, that whether the person has experienced it, we don't know. And whether also, what they've experienced, sometimes what happens is that they don't themselves always understand what it is that they've seen, or that what they've seen is very particular. To give an example, now we're going through this coronavirus thing. So someone has a dream that say it's from Allah. It's ru'yatul salihah, or ru'ya sadiqah. It's a true dream from Allah. But it's very, very, very general. What do we mean? It is general to a specific era, to a specific people living in a specific time. So it is not binding on others. Look at all the other things that I've mentioned. Scientific facts, if you want, if you will, right, for lack of a better word, things that we perceive through our senses, they at times become a general rule for everybody, even generations afterwards, the laws of physics as an example. But even then, sometimes that's the funny thing about scientific facts, because they change. They're not as reliable as the other categories. Like intellectually, things like mathematics, 2 plus 2 equals 4, is a universal law that's not going to be specific to a particular era or people living in a particular experience. It's always going to be that way. Same things with historical facts. The fact that Egypt was once at one time ruled by Fir'aun and his name and so forth and so on, the fact that Napoleon existed, the fact that Muhammad existed, those are facts that are not pertinent to just one type of people or era or particular situation. You understand what I'm saying? Whereas if a person has a dream that is related only to, let's say right now, coronavirus, then that is very particular to a very particular era, to a very particular people. It's not binding on others to accept. Okay? Unlike other things. So this is the idea that we have universal principles that are binding upon all people. We say that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and all that he brought is true, is not something pertinent just to a particular people living in a particular situations like the Arabs in his time. No, it is a universal fact. So much so that even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about it in ways that other Anbiya and prophets knew about him coming and were told to take an oath to follow him. Okay, so a lot of subjects here. But the idea is other questions are asked about how do you know if it's a prophet? Well, obviously that's why we should learn more about the prophet's description. People sometimes, I don't know, for whatever reason, if you love something or someone, then the more that you love it, the more you want to know about it. But, you should know the prophet's description in detail. But also you have, because the Prophet ﷺ said that Shaitan cannot take the form of him, ﷺ, so you'll know, either by, if you don't know his description, you will know just by, let's say, the radar you have, which is your soul, that is the Prophet ﷺ, because it will not lie to you. Lies, as we said before, as the hadith that the Prophet said, ﷺ, in the sidqa tu'manina, the truth always puts into you a sense of itminan, comfort, and it is something, again, like when you hear a fact, even it comforts you. You say, I can accept that. It gives you itminan. Where rayba or lies cause you the opposite. Well, kidba rayba, with it that lies will cause you to feel unsure, insecure, or you don't really know. So if you see a true dream, this is the basis of it, and without getting the details, a true dream will be so strong that it is just like being told a fact. 2 plus 2 equals 4, and you don't contest it. It will be so strong to your soul that you will not contest it. You will realize that, yes, this was a true dream. And the same thing goes for seeing the Prophet ﷺ. That just like things that we know and they are, they give us comfort, itminan of the heart. The same thing will happen that when you see it, it will not be confusing. It will not be something that you doubt or second guess. It will be something that you know for certain. The only issue after that is whether this dream is binding on others. And we say, no, it is not. However, they are messages, so they should not be ignored either. It's just that those messages, as I said, if it makes sense to you, they are for particular people in particular times. They're not, unlike, as we say, the Quran is revelation, it is for everybody. So it's not for particular people or particular times, but this is universal. Wallahu alam. Before I may stop here so we can have some questions, I would just like to relate one hadith that's, also talks about the soul at the time of death that will give us maybe a little bit of hope. This hadith is related by Imam Ahmad in his Musnad, Abu Dawood in his Sunan, and Imam Hakim in his Mustadrak. And when the Prophet ﷺ described that, he said, إن العبد المؤمن إذا كان في انقطاع من الدنيا وإقبال من الآخرة نزل إليه ملائكة من السماء. That when the time comes for a believing servant of Allah to end their time in this, when the time comes for them to depart this world and go towards the Akhirah, then Malaika descend from the skies to greet him. They will have bright faces as bright as the sun, and they will have akfan, the kafan, shrouds, but not worldly shrouds, because this shroud is meant to cover the soul. So these will be أكفان من كفن الجنة. They will be shrouds from the shrouds of Jannah. And they will be inside of them, they will have a perfume and a smell that will delight the soul. Until they sit close to him. حتى يجلسوا منه مد البصر. They sit close enough to him that they can be seen by the person who's passing. ولكن لا تبصرون. But the Quran says, of course, those of you around you, as the Prophet describes in this hadith too, are not able to perceive all of that. If you could, see, this is part of the test. If that part of existence was opened up to you at that point in time, then everyone would have no problem with dying, and life would not be a test. Right? And the reality of life is a test. If you had that vision, you wouldn't even worry about it. So if that's what death is, who cares? Right? Then there's no test. But then for the person experiencing it, though, it becomes, again, you might not be comfortable, obviously, because you're leaving all that you know. And anytime you have to go to something new where you have no experience and you don't know what to do, as we're seeing now, like what's going to happen, right? Everyone becomes perturbed and scared. So what does Allah do as a mercy? Is He sends these angels with such beautiful things. If you can, akfan Jannah, shrouds from Jannah, smells from Jannah, and then they sit so where the person can see them, meaning you're not alone. You understand? You'll be able to see them. You're not alone. And then He would basically, medical melt will come with them, and He will sit by the side of that person and say, أيتها النفس الطيبة اخرجي إلى مغفرة من الله ورضوان. So you can only imagine how beautiful that would be, that the angel of death will come and call you, "O pure and beautiful soul." So again, when you have to go to something like the new day of school, right? People are anxious, don't know what's going to happen, and then when you get there, if everyone's happy, the teachers are welcoming, the principal, whoever, they're putting on almost like a party for you. It makes you feel better about the situation. I'm going to be okay. I'm in good hands. So here, the angel of death is calling you a nafsul tayyiba, oh, pure and beautiful soul, to make you feel better, that you don't have to be scared about this moment. We're here for you, if you will, by the permission of Allah, of course, that come out from this world, but there's something better. Maghfiratin min Allah, to Allah's forgiveness, one, and His acceptance and His pleasure. In other words, don't worry, you're not leaving something behind. You're actually coming to something greater. And from that point, فَتَخْرُ تَسِيرُ كَمَا تَسِيرُ الْقَطْرُ مِنْ فِي السِّقَاءِ. So then the human soul will come out, as the Prophet described it, like the drop of water comes out of the water, the bag of, like, what they call it, I forget the name, like the bag of water, like there's a word for it in English. There's, like a skin, a water skin that people used to use to drink water. So the drop that comes out, it will come out that easily from the body. And then when that happens, you can't see what's going on, but they can see it. And when that happens, the Prophet ﷺ said, "لم يدعها في يده طرفة عين حتى يأخذها." That not even for the blink of an eye, not even for a moment, in other words, does it happen that the soul comes out, that it is then wrapped in that coffin from Jannah, and then the smell of the misk, of the smell of Jannah that's there, that is likened to misk in this hadith, will be better than anything you have ever smelled in this world, of misk or any other perfume for that matter. And then فَيَصْعَدُونَ بِهَا, then that soul is taken up, in other words, through the seven heavens. In each heaven, they are greeted by the Malaika with the best titles. Same thing, to comfort that soul. That may give them the best of titles, the best of names that they used to be called in this world. So again, it's based on attributes. And that's why it's important to focus on the soul's attributes before that time comes. So if you're known to be sakhi, generous, you will be called that in each door of heaven that you traverse through. If you're known to be anything positive, that's what you will be called through each door, or each door of every heaven that you go through, until the time comes when you get to the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the seventh heaven, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Uktubu kitabi abdi fi illiyin," that record this slave of mine as amongst those who are in the illiyin, which is mentioned in the Quran. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا إِلِّيُّونَ كِتَابٌ مَرْقُومٌ يَشْهَدُهُ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ. This is the register, if you will, of those souls whom Allah has accepted, and they will be written there, and then their dwelling will be, as after that, in many different stages. It will be brought back to earth. It will then dwell in the seventh heaven, or anywhere that Allah so wills. That is another discussion in itself. But I figured I'd just share that hadith before we close now, just to give us an idea of all of these things that we're talking about, is to make us somewhat more comfortable. We don't end with this world. This world is a simple trial and test that we pass through. Prepare your souls to such extent that these will be the things that it experiences at death and afterwards, to such an extent that the pleasure that a person will actually feel will be much greater than the pain they had to feel in this world. And after that, they would feel like almost as if nothing had happened. You know, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make all these things easy for us. If you want, because we open up the discussion of this hadith about dreams and, it being a portion of Nubuwah and what are true dreams, maybe we can discuss that further. It's up to you guys, when we meet next time. Inshallah. Like dhikr being prescribed in dreams. Yeah, that can happen. That can happen, which is fine. There's no reason to reject it. But again, that the primary role is that we cannot really make people, accept it either. Meaning it's not like, all the commandments that we have in Sharia are based on evidences from Wahi or some form of Wahi, or at least based on Wahi. So it can't be the same, but that doesn't mean it should be rejected either. So you can act on it and it's not a problem. It can be. The nafs in the time of dream state, it can be an indicator of where we are. That's why certain things help you to kind of get clearer dreams, if you will, and have these experiences more often. And part of that is, like I said, there's many things, and that's why maybe, I guess, we can talk about that maybe further next time we meet. So it's sometimes, yes, that's why sometimes good dreams are also warnings too, in a sense that it's like, like a child being chided by their parents that, don't keep this up or you might get bad grades. So that's also a mercy from Allah. Sometimes a person sees themselves in a certain state. There's a famous story, just to give an example, of Malik ibn Dinar, rahimahullah ta'ala, was a very famous personality in the history of Islam. He's, written in the books of Tabaqat and exceptional personalities and shuyukh and ulama. It is said that, before he made tawbah and reformed himself, he was actually a police officer and he was a drunk. He used to drink. And one night he had a dream. He had a daughter apparently that died young that he was very attached to. And in that dream, he went to bed drunk without praying Isha, he said. And when he was sleeping, he saw in his dream that a snake was chasing him. And the snake almost chased him into Jahannam. But the Malaika guarding Jahannam said, you're not one of these people, so you can't come here. But the snake was still chasing him. So he thought, like, where am I going to go? I think about a snake so frightening that he was ready to jump into Jahannam. So as he kept on running around, there was a group of children that he saw coming from Jannah, and one of them happened to be his daughter. And so the daughter killed the snake, and then he talked to his daughter for a while, and the daughter explained to him what this dream meant, which is basically that his deeds had become so much that they almost took him to the brink of Jahannam. And so that made him it was the catalyst for him to make Tawbah and change his life, and now he's written in history books. So those dreams can happen like that too, right? So we can see our state, but that doesn't always mean it has to be, written in stone. That in his case, it was a warning. But it was a good thing because it helped him make Tawbah and become the great person that he was, rahimahullah ta'ala. So, but yeah, we can kind of gauge it to a certain extent, but you don't want to be too hard on yourself. There are many great personalities that don't have these kind of special dreams, and there are reasons for that as well. But also remember that the hadith said, in the last days, when people will not have access to pious people or ulama. This is what the ulama explained. They will not have access to clarity. It is in those times that Allah will have mercy on them and give them these true visions to give them basically the courage and also the kind of like answers they need, like what's going on, what's going to happen. So it's not always necessary that you have to be particularly pious, or you just have to have this concept. You first have to understand first that your existence is not just based on the physical body and your soul. That's the whole point of these hadith. of dream states of death is that the soul, as I said, the book is titled Ar-Ruh al-Jawal. Your soul has the capacity to traverse fil awalim, through different stages of existence, through different realities, through different, if you will, like they say, uh, what do they call it? Like a different universe or whatever words you want to use to describe realities outside of the world that we're in right now. But that's the important thing to concentrate on, that we are not subjugated nor even relegated or even confined to this world. This is the least of it, right? We are much more, we are far beyond that. So we should start getting ourselves used to that fact first, to lessen also the trials of this world. Of course, the trials of the world are going to be more pertinent to us because that's where we are now. So a person always prefers the immediate than what they don't know. Hence, that's why Abdul ibn Masud anhu cried when he heard the ayah "Bal tu'thiruna al-hayat ad-dunya," that you prefer the life of this world, and he said that because it's in front of us now. So out of sight, out of mind, as the saying goes. So we tend to, obviously, but we have to remind ourselves, and we have to remind ourselves of certain experiences that we have that teaches us that we are more than that. That's why I mentioned certain things about this, even just our body reacting, and that our mind, if it's not aware of the body being hurt, it won't feel the pain. In the body reacting to experiences in the sleep state to something that's not happening to it, it all proves that, just to kind of remind us that it's well beyond this body and this world. Your existence is well beyond that. So that just to remind us and help us, and also to maybe get us prepared, so that when all of that happens, we are more cognizant of it. We have a kind of like an ability to understand these things in the dream state and in death and everything else. And like I said, maybe I'm going to leave it here for other questions. We can actually go into that topic a little bit more, bi'idhnillah, in as much detail as we can next week, inshallah, if you agree to it, if everyone agrees to that, inshallah.
Okay, Brother Dickinson, thank you so much for all the insightful. I don't see any other question in the chat window yet. So I'm going to unmute everyone so that, everyone has the opportunity to ask question if he or she wants. So I'm going to unmute. So if you are not going to ask anything, please mute yourself. Okay, everyone is unmuted. So if anyone has any question, please go ahead and ask.
I guess not.
Yeah, I don't think so anyone has any more question left. So thank you so much. I'm gonna end the meeting, and we'll continue this same subject, same topic in the next class or lecture, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.